So hi everyone, thanks for joining tonight. My name's Beth. I am the Events and Admin Officer here at the SWI. I think we've only got sort of exclusive SWI members on tonight, so I don't need to do a spiel about what the SWI is. You should hopefully all know what that is. But yeah, thanks for joining us tonight. We've got a lovely little talk with Richard here. If you haven't attended one of our online events before, I'll just give you sort of quick ground rules as to how it will work. So I'll pass over to Richard and he will entertain you guys for about 40 minutes or so. It'll leave probably about 10-15 minutes at the end for a little Q&A session. So during the event, if there are any questions specific to what Richard's talking about, feel free to pop it in the chat or raise your hand just so we can make it sort of aware that you're wanting to ask a question. Otherwise, if you save them for towards the end, and then same thing at the end, you can pop it in the chat, you can unmute yourself, you can come up, you can speak to Richard, answer your questions that way, whatever you are more comfortable with. The session is being recorded. We typically cut out the Q&A session when we post it on YouTube afterwards. So not that there's anything sort of too confidential I think we should be speaking about here, but just feel free to sort of ask away. Nothing will be posted online if you don't want. But yeah, I'm going to pass over to Richard now and I'll let him take it away.
Lovely. Thanks, Beth. Good evening, everybody. And thank you very much. When this was booked last year, I hadn't realised it was the evening before the bank holiday. So thank you all for joining. And particularly if the sun's shining where you are, it has been today, then yeah, thank you even more for taking the time to join. So I'm Richard McIlwain. I'm the CEO of the Vegetarian Society. What I'll do over the next 40 minutes or so is I'm going to talk very briefly at the start about what the Vegetarian Society does and the history and a little bit of the history in Scotland as well. I'll move through that quite quickly. And then I'll move on to the reasons why people become vegetarian or vegan, because we are a broad church society. I always say we're welcome to vegetarians, vegans, welcome to flexitarians, welcome to people who are concerned about who eat meat but want to reduce their meat intake. Our doors are open for everybody. And then talk a little bit about the types of foods and some of the questions around nutrients and so on, which I'm sure people have, particularly if you're not already vegetarian or vegan. Hopefully, at the end of it, we'll have had a quick trot through everything. I'm happy. Beth said it's going on Facebook. I'm happy to share the slides as well because there will be some content I'm sure I'll move through quite quickly that you may want to look at your leisure. So. Vegetarian Society. When everybody sort of talks about, veganuary and so on, I think, it's been brilliant. It's been a huge wave over the last 10 years. Vegetarian Society has been around since 1847. So, I'm very privileged to lead this very long-standing organisation. In fact, the oldest vegetarian and vegan campaigning society anywhere in the world. And if I can move the slides on, this is our, just to sort of locate us, this is our new HQ. We moved in here last year. So this is in Manchester city centre in Ancoats. It's the headquarters for our campaign staff. We also have a large teaching kitchen there. So I like to say that we don't just talk the talk, we also walk the walk. So we will teach people how to prepare a range of vegetarian and vegan meals, but also do a lot of community outreach with people who couldn't ordinarily afford a cookery class, but for whom actually plant-based eating could actually be a really important part of their overall lifestyles. You may well have seen our trademarks as well. So on the right-hand side are vegetarian and vegan approved trademarks. So we provide third-party accreditation to a range of products, everything from Quorn and McDonald's at the top through to startup companies producing vegan protein shakes, for instance. And just recently, we've introduced a brand new plant-based trademark, which we're pushing out globally. And obviously, this is just to give people confidence that if you do want to follow a vegetarian or vegan diet, that you can pick up a product. You don't have to read the ingredients list. You can just look at that logo and be confident that it's been approved by our experts. We also run a number of campaigns. We've been running something called National Vegetarian Week for around 30 years. It used to be in May. It's now in October. It's timed on the 1st of October to time with World Vegetarian Day. And then October is World Vegetarian Month, if you were unaware. So look out for that coming up in October. But we've also started now running a number of animal welfare campaigns, particularly focused on the way that vegetarian foods are produced. This is predominantly dairy and eggs, because whilst vegetarians may consume dairy and eggs, we can't really be comfortable with the industrial nature by which they're produced. So this brand new campaign on the right, Ban, Hatch and Dispatch, was launched in April. And what we're looking to do is raise awareness of the fact that what many people may know of as day-old chicks, the unwanted byproduct of the egg industry, which currently are killed within 72 days of hatching, don't need to be, because you can determine the sex while they're still in the egg without having to have them hatch and then kill them. So we're hoping to get the government to legislate to ban that, because a number of European countries have already banned it. It's very low-hanging fruit. That is just a very quick whistle-stop tour of the Vegetarian Society, because you don't want to just hear about us. You want to hear about what it means to be a vegetarian or a vegan, or indeed what it means to just reduce your meat and introduce maybe some more plant-based foods into your diet. But it's really interesting. I did say we formed in 1847. The organisation came out of the melting pot of the 19th century. So there's a London movement and a Manchester movement, and particularly in the Manchester movement, if you think about the exodus of people from rural areas into the cities in the early 19th century looking for work, you ended up with a lot of slum conditions and people eating very, very poor diets, very carbohydrate-rich diets, bowls of gruel, i.e. thin porridge, bread, potatoes, a little bit of vegetables, very occasionally meat, but the diet was very poor. Now, obviously, the early 19th century was a time for social reforming in a number of forms. So in Salford, Reverend William, two wonderful photographs. These gentlemen don't look the cheeriest of folks, but and ironically, the two people who are sort of instrumental in the modern day vegetarian movement are called Cowherd and Lamb. So you've got Reverend William, and one's a reverend, one's a doctor. It's really interesting. So Reverend William Cowherd from Salford in Manchester preached out of Salford, set up a vegetarian soup kitchen, encouraged his congregation to abstain from meat, and created this movement within Manchester. And this was around sort of 1808 onwards. So he came at it from a sort of societal point of view and a religious point of view. Dr. William Lamb, again around the turn of the 18th century, early 19th century, had a range of chronic illnesses and cured himself with a plant-based diet, and therefore became quite evangelical about it and decided that more people needed to know about it. He wrote a book. And by hook or by crook, the London contingent, the Manchester contingent, came together at a meeting in Ramsgate, of all places, and set up the Vegetarian Society. And the statue there on the right is a guy called Joseph Brotherton, who was the very first MP for Salford, but also chaired the first meeting of the Vegetarian Society, was himself vegetarian and one of the great Victorian reformers in Parliament. The society very quickly moved up to Manchester because, frankly, that's where all the money was. That's where all the cotton merchants and the textile mills were. And we've been there pretty much ever since, but we are a UK-based organisation. In fact, we are an international organisation. We're a member of a range of international networks. Now, from a Scottish point of view, it wasn't much after that the first Scottish Vegetarian Society was formed. Again, throughout the 19th century, a lot of food reformers up in Scotland as well as in England. The very first meeting of what would become the Scottish Vegetarian Society was actually in Glasgow at something called the Garden Restaurant, which was a vegetarian restaurant. In fact, there were more vegetarian restaurants in the UK in the late 19th century than there are today, interestingly enough. And for those of you who know, forgive me, I've done a grab off Google Maps because I'm not overly familiar with Glasgow, but this is Bothwell Street. I suspect most of these buildings post date 1892. I'm not sure, but somewhere on there is 17 Bothwell Street, where the very first meeting would have happened. And I think what's interesting where you look at the committee members, in a time in the 19th century, which was very extremely male dominated, actually the vegetarian movement had a number of ladies who were quite prominent in the movement. And this is actually in both England and Scotland. And a lot of ladies, women at the time, were actually associated with the suffragette movement and saw that sort of reforming zeal in the 19th century for women's rights. Also linked to vegetarianism and the rights of animals and health of society generally. This was the very first dinner that was served in the Garden Vegetarian restaurant. It doesn't look too bad. I don't think hodgepodge, I believe Scottish, classic Scottish casserole or soup. But there's a good mix of protein. Tomato, brown sauce, and curry sauce. I don't think that's unfamiliar to many people today. Good range of veg, good range of sweets. So, they weren't eating completely dull food. They were eating actually a good range of food with a good range of protein, carbohydrate, vegetables, and fruits. And this is what they were trying to encourage others to come around to. They held a series of meetings, but the one thing I'm keen to reference here, I'd really like to find out more about Mrs. A.S. Hunter, because I can't find much online, but she may be in our journals, because all of our journals going back to 1847 are in our Manchester office. She was both president from 1908 to 1914. She was also a member of the International Women's Vegetarian Union. You can see her name there on the right, amongst a number of others. And the quote, "One of the greatest pioneers of the health of people that Scotland has ever produced," is quite an epitaph. So I'd quite like to try and find out a little bit more about Mrs. Hunter of Bridge of Allan. But of course, if you fast forward to today, really, sometimes I feel like I'm in the minority within the vegetarian vegan movement, because it's a strong female-led movement. Linda McCartney family are our patrons, actually, the Vegetarian Society. We're very proud of that. So we do work with Paul McCartney and Mary McCartney in particular, sometimes Stella, but obviously Linda McCartney was the lady who kicked it all off. But you've got a range of other people there, from sort of classic movie stars to TV presenters, to sort of more modern movie stars, all of whom are. And the reason I pick these ladies out is not because they follow a vegetarian or vegan diet, but they actually are vocal in that as well, in actively encouraging others to do the same. So there's always been, I think, a strong female streak through the movement from the 19th century right up to today. So that is a very quick 10-minute whistle-stop tour on who we are and history, and a little bit about the sort of Scottish branch as well. And if you're wondering about the Scottish Vegetarian Society, it was ultimately subsumed into the Vegetarian Society as a Scottish branch, and then what you find is a lot of the community groups that used to operate around the country are now actually Facebook groups, and the rise of digital media. So they became a part of the wider Vegetarian Society over time. Now, moving on. Why be vegetarian or vegan? Very quickly, there are a number of reasons why people choose to give up meat, start thinking about cutting down on their meat. For me, many years ago, the reason was animal welfare and animal rights, and why do we treat certain animals very differently? So, if you harm a puppy or a kitten, the media all over the world falls on you. We're always at pains to try and look after our native wildlife, but some animals, because they're farmed animals, actually more intelligent pigs than both hedgehogs, but also dogs, we are okay to treat them in a certain way and kill them for food. Don't worry about this slide. Environmental reasons, basically. So other people now worry about fate of the planet, think about climate change, think about biodiversity loss. And one of the big drivers for that, I'm sure you may be aware, is animal agriculture. And there is a lot of studies and research going on that shows that actually meat, and in the top right-hand chart there, beef, lamb and mutton, are two of the foods that have the highest footprint when it comes to the amount of greenhouse gases per kilogram of food. So actually eating less meat and eating more vegetarian and vegan food can also be good for the planet. And some people choose to come at vegetarian vegan diets from a very environmental focus. But I think one of the key ones from an individual perspective is health. And I'll talk about this a little bit more. So before I go on to talk about the types of foods that you can eat and why I think vegetarian and vegan diets it can be just as joyful and nutritious as meat-based diets, is because health studies back this up. There is one in the US which looks at the Adventist community, religious community, around 40% of whom are vegetarians. And the data that comes from the US study is very similar to this study here, which is called the EPIC Oxford study. EPIC is a study focused around Europe looking at rates of cancer over time, but there was a specific UK cohort, which is studied of 65,000 people, which has been studied since the 1990s. So they followed people through time. And what you see is that those people who are vegetarian or vegan have generally better outcomes when it comes to a range of non-communicable diseases. So diabetes, type 2 diabetes, obviously, there's a nearly 40% less risk in vegetarians and vegans, cardiovascular disease and stroke, range of instances of cancers, and that chart there, the blocks to the left of the center line show a lower instance of a range of cancers. So I really like to major on this study because there's a lot of misinformation flies around about what it means to be vegetarian or vegan. But broadly speaking, if you follow a good, balanced vegetarian or vegan diet, your health outcomes across a range of the things which are giving us big problems at the moment in the UK, you have a lower instance or a lower risk of those illnesses than if you weren't vegetarian or vegan. So I think that's the first thing I always like to major on. But it's not just scientific studies or vegetarian organisations that are shouting about this. Some of the traditional health organisations, British Heart Foundation here, are now also not suggesting that people go vegetarian or vegan, but actually suggesting that people reduce the amount of meat they eat. And I'm always at pains to stress, we're a very pragmatic organisation, and I personally am a very pragmatic person. I ate meat till I was 18. I was vegetarian for many, many years, and I had a few slips. I went back to eating meat. I try to follow a vegan diet now, but it's quite hard, I have to say, sometimes. So from a personal point of view, how can I preach to people that you should just give up meat straight away and go vegetarian or go vegan? I think we need to meet people where they are. But the reality is, even if you just cut down your meat, even if you have a couple of meat-free days a week, you can substantially reduce your risk of certain types of illnesses. And you'll find that cancer research and British Heart Foundation and others are now positively encouraging people to cut down on the meat that they eat. And this is going to be the latest thing. I mean, we've known about fibre for a long time. Anybody who grew up in the 70s or 80s know that there were all bran flakes adverts on telly all the time. But I think increasingly the importance of fibre in a diet is now coming to the fore. And we've heard a lot about protein and so on, but fibre is being seen actually as something that, because of a lack of fibre in our diet, it's being seen as an underlying cause of a range of illnesses, which actually could be overcome or certainly reduced by introducing more fibre. And of course, the way to introduce more fibre into your diet is to eat more plant-based foods. So this is from the NHS website. And if you look at the tips to increase your fibre intake, this is not a vegetarian or vegan campaign. This is just health tips. It's cereals, it's potatoes, it's pulses and beans and vegetables and fruits and nuts. So almost de facto, the way to introduce more fibre is to eat more plants, eat more grains, eat more healthy cereals. And the key thing, I think, for the one message I'd get to take away is, if you want to go full on vegetarian or vegan, that's fantastic. And there's a range of information out there to help you. But for some people, it can just feel way too far away. So actually start slow, swap out meat in one meal, try one day, try 2 days, and just take it as you wish to take it. But the key thing is that people make a start rather than thinking it's too hard and therefore not bothering at all. So given all those health information, the fact that, actually eating less meat, eating no meat, even potentially cutting out dairy, cutting out eggs is really good for you. We're all going to be eating less meat, obviously. That's not the case. Global meat production is actually on the rise. And although meat consumption has fallen a little in the UK, what you find globally is that developing countries are eating more meat than ever. And it's a sign of affluence. It's a sign that, something that was once a luxury can now be had 5 times, 7 times a week. And obviously the livestock industry responds to that. So we're seeing more rainforest felling, we're seeing more cattle ranching, and we're seeing a larger consumption of meat. So actually, if anything, it's going the other way. So we've got this divergence of issues. Eating less meat is healthier, but actually globally, we're starting to eat far more meat. And in the UK, whilst there has been a reduction, it's still a major part of most people's diets. And there's a reason for this. It's normal. It's mainstream, isn't it? It's actually quite still. I use my local pub as a barometer. It's just down the road, and people think it's odd to be vegetarian, never mind vegan. And for most people, they haven't even thought about it. We're surrounded by advertising. You can't walk past a bus shelter without seeing some sort of advert for meat. It's all over the television. It's not a proper cookery program unless they're cooking meat. And even from a fitness point of view, if I just use the example of the gym that I go to, there's lots of strapping young 20 somethings in there, and they all talk about diet. They're all into wellness and fitness, but they talk about meat consumption, chicken, beef they're eating because they're looking to build muscle. When in fact you don't need it. You can build muscle on plant-based diet. So it is very much the wallpaper to our lives. So it's perhaps not surprising that we grow up eating meat and not really considering that there are alternatives to eating meat. And just to finish on this point, Eat Lancet is a commission of scientists around the world that work to think, what is the ideal plate that we should be eating? And again, this wasn't vegetarian or vegan. This is thinking about what's a healthy plate when looking globally. And you can see that really half your plate is filled with vegetables. You've got a good chunk of whole grains, the mustard coloured box. But actually what you see is that animal source protein, the red box, and dairy foods are a very small overall component part of that diet. It's akin in a way to what most people might call the Mediterranean diet, the Blue Zones diet. You may have heard of Blue Zones. The reality is on the right-hand side, this is typically what we're eating. So it's a much greater share of animal-based products, and it's a much greater share of unhealthy refined carbohydrates, the fast food, the ready meals, cakes, confectionery, crisps, etc. And so we've got this huge divergence between what the ideal plate should look like and actually what we are eating, or actually what the food industry is encouraging us to eat. Because it is quite an uphill battle when you're faced with promotions and supermarkets pushing what are actually quite unhealthy foods. So, how do you, if you're encouraged by that and you think, actually, yeah, do you know what? I am actually vegetarian and vegan. I'd like some hints and tips. I'd like to go vegetarian and vegan. I'd like to probably eat a bit less meat. How can I go about that? There's a range of help and advice already out there. So this is our website, a shameless push for the Vegetarian Society. So there's lots of helpful information on here in terms of the campaigns we run, but also we've got a whole host of recipes on there. There's information about our cookery school. There's information about nutrition on there. But some of the recipes that you can find on our website. So I'd recommend just Google Vegetarian Society and have a look. But the world is awash with vegetarian and vegan cookery books. Whereas once upon a time, back in the 60s or 70s, you may have had the odd one. You go into any branch of Waterstones now, look at the cookery section, and there's always a raft of vegetarian and vegan books. There's a raft of online recipes, whether it's on the BBC recipes site or there is not a want of information on great vegetarian and vegan recipes. So, books or Google is your friend. There's a huge array of fantastic stuff out there. That's the first point to make. The second point to make is I've sort of already referred to this. It's okay to go at your own pace. There are lots of people, particularly online commentators, who will go, you must go vegan, And I think there might be some people who listen to that message, and I'm not downplaying it at all. But I also think for a lot of people it can be quite off-putting. Because where do I start? What do I do? I don't want to go vegan. I would like to cut down my meat. I think I should be eating a little bit more healthily. And so I would say start from where you're at, go slow, try a meal, try a recipe, read a little bit, try a cookery course. There are plenty of cookery schools up in Scotland. Obviously, I recommend you come to Manchester and try one of ours. But um, it's really important that people start from where they're at and don't get upset or worried or actually fatigued by it and thinking, oh, I just can't be bothered. I'll go back to where I were. And one of the big worries, despite the explosion in the range of meals and things, we're still very much a meat and two veg country, aren't we? Really. And I think when people think about, oh, how do I cut down on meat? This is the bit they worry about. What am I going to stick in that third of the plate if the meat has gone? Now there is an answer to that, and I'll just pause on this bit for a while because you know 7 8 years ago there were no plant-based and vegetarian aisles in supermarkets. Now they're in all of the major supermarkets, and there's been an explosion in the range of meat alternatives as they're termed. So this is everything from chicken pieces, steaks, hoisin duck kits, burgers, sausages. So if you do just simply want to eat a traditional meal, but just put something on the plate that has a texture of meat, then you can do it. And some are better than others. I would always say try one. If you don't like it, try another brand. There is obviously concern increasingly around ultra-processed foods, which I'm sure some of you won't be unaware of. Plant-based foods fall into that. They are ultra-processed as the definition exists. Now, just to break that down a little bit, the idea of processing and the scale and this category of ultra-processed is not a health definition. It's purely a definition that describes the amount of processing that a food has gone under. It doesn't make any statements about whether it's healthy or not. And a lot of the studies that show that consuming too much ultra-processed food is bad for you look at a basket full of ultra-processed foods, which is everything from crisps and confectionery and sweets and meat-based ready meals, and a very small proportion of these plant-based foods. So when they say ultra-processed foods are bad, it doesn't necessarily mean that eating these is bad net per se. The guidance I would give on these as somebody who does eat these sorts of foods as well is to eat them in moderation. Clearly, if you're eating these 3 times a day, 7 times a week, I don't think that's going to be great. Shop on your traffic lights. So look for ones that are low in saturated fat, low in salt, low in sugar, and look for ones that have minimum of ingredients on the back. And I think if you're eating those in moderation in a broadly healthy diet, I don't think there's any problem. The key thing with them compared to meat is not only can they be high in protein, but they can also be high in fiber as well. And meat has no fiber. So it's a great way also to up your fiber content. If you remember, fiber, I think, is going to be one of the next big pushes from health authorities, from a preventative health point of view, certainly. But other protein sources are available, and these are, if you like, the more traditional protein sources. Tofu and tempeh come from soybeans. Seitan is a wheat protein, so clearly if you're gluten intolerant, that's going to be no good. But also, there's a range of beans and range of pulses. Beans, we're used to beans on toast, but it's the wonder of shopping in supermarkets and the fact we live in the UK is there's a huge array of beans: navy beans, pinto beans, black-eyed beans, butter beans. And you can experiment with those, and they're a fantastic source of fiber, a fantastic source of protein, in fact, a fantastic source of some of the key nutrients as well. Some people have really bad experiences with tofu. Just coming back to that side of it, they try it once, it's been pretty badly cooked, and it tastes like a piece of old sponge, and they never go back. Again, I would say don't give up. There are fantastic ways of preparing tofu. And actually, if you go to your local Chinese supermarket and buy the deep fried tofu, which isn't as healthy, it's got some seed oils in, but actually gives you the bite and the texture that you might associate with meat, then you can create some fantastic dishes. So you have a range when it comes to those sort of key, if you like, meat replacement protein sources. The the alternative meats that are coming on the market now, or perhaps the more traditional sources. And when you look at those more traditional sources, you can create a fantastic range of dishes. I put the one on the left because it's one of my favorites, tomato and chickpea stew. It's just like the easiest dish you can do. Chickpeas, tomato puree, plum tomatoes, onion, garlic, and a little bit of salt, seasoning, etc. Cayenne pepper. It takes 15 minutes to prepare, but it's a fantastically healthy, nutritious meal. Tofu stir fry, again, really, really easy. And then on the bottom, lentil cottage pie. And I do think one of these is really interesting because it's a very traditional dish, but actually when it's prepared with lentils in a rich gravy, I think it's almost just as good as the meat variety, except that not only are you getting the protein, but you're getting all that fibre and you're getting those micronutrients at the same time. And this, I just pause on this slide because I always like to show people that vegetarian and vegan food can be. It's not a hair shirt process. People think, oh, it's going to be boring. I'm going to be eating dull food. It's like, no, you're not. You're going to be eating rich food. You're going to be eating nutritious food. You're going to be eating great tasting food. And clearly, I say this a lot in my talks. If you can talk about nutrition and health till the cows come home, but if it doesn't look good and taste good, no one's going to be eating it. And so it's really crucial that we major on the fact that plant-based foods are. And vegetarian foods, dairy and eggs, can be fantastically flavorful, full of textures, and look fantastic at the same time. Now, thinking what else is in the supermarket, this is something else. This needs to be a voyage of exploration. It needs to feel fun. So, whereas most of us rush into the supermarket, and I'm guilty of this myself, and pick a bag of carrots, pick a bag of broccoli, and then rush off to the next section. We've got this world of vegetables and fruits, literally from around the world, and pause a while, explore what's there, have a think. We've got a whole range of of different types of potatoes, sweet potatoes, incredibly nutritious. If you wanted to try something different to the ordinary potato, but a range of fantastic green vegetables, fruits from around the world. We're very, very lucky in that respect, and yet I think far too few of us stop and experiment there. So treat it as a bit of a voyage of exploration. And then I've talked a lot about vegetarian, but of course, some people do prefer to follow a vegan diet, or actually just prefer to cut out dairy or eggs for one reason or another. There are a range of plant-based milks. I'm sure no one on this call will be unfamiliar with that. Everything now from soya, oat, almond, coconut, you name it. There are now a range of plant-based cheeses, and I would be perfectly honest, I have not found a vegan cheese that I like. The ones at the top, the mass-produced ones, tend to be based on coconut oil. Some people absolutely rave about them and love them. There's something about me, I don't know. I can't get a taste for them. The nut-based cheeses at the bottom, those on cashews, I'm much more, I like a lot better, actually. But you tend to have to buy those from sort of specialist online retailers or specialist shops. And then, of course, there are alternatives to eggs. I'm not saying that you're going to create the perfect poached egg in the way that you can, but if you're looking for egg replacers, particularly in baking, there are a range of products out there. Or there's the more traditional product, which is aquafaba, which is simply just the drained juice from a can of chickpeas, which can be used in meringues, it can be used in baking as a direct replacement for egg whites. And so thinking, where am I up to? So thinking around, where do I start? I always like to say, by all means, rush off and do a Southeast Asian fusion meal if that's what you want. But in some ways, you're already eating a lot of vegetarian and vegan foods, believe it or not. Anyone who's had beans on toast with a smear of margarine has just eaten a vegan meal. Anyone who's had scrambled egg has eaten a vegetarian meal. And you would never think, oh, I'm serving you a vegetarian meal. You just serve it because it's normal food. And that element of normal, I'm always keen to stress that you're probably already eating a range of meat-free dishes without necessarily thinking about the fact that it's meat-free. So have a think about what you. I was encouraging have a think over 7 days what you eat, and I'm pretty sure you will be having some of these already. And then this looks complex, but I don't suggest rush out and try and buy all these in one go. But it's quite interesting to think about. Well, okay, if I'm going to build up and eat a bit more vegetarian or plant-based foods, there's probably some stuff I need to get in. Most of us have got a bit of a spice rack going somewhere on the left. There's the umami stuff, that fifth taste that gives that richness, so you can get that from a range of sources. Nutritional yeast flakes are fantastic. If you've never had them, it gives a kind of umami, sort of almost like cheesiness to dishes that you can't replicate sometimes without cheese. And then obviously you can pick up dried beans, you can pick up tinned beans really cheaply. And then on the right hand side, obviously the fresh foods. So there's nothing particularly unusual here. It's more just a case of having some stuff in, so that, for instance, if I did want to prepare that tomato and chickpea stew, I can reach for a can of chickpeas, I can reach for a can of plum tomatoes, squirt of tomato puree, onion, garlic, away you go. And you can build off that. Find 3 or 4 dishes that you really like cooking, and make sure you've got the contents in, and bit by bit you can build up the basis for a kitchen in which you can produce some great meat-free meals. And then the other one is that, again, thinking about vegetables, most of like dump them on the plate, out of a pan of water or steamer, stick them on, spend time prepping the other sides. There's lots of ways of prepping vegetables. I'm sure I won't be telling you. Oven roasting vegetables, fantastic. Sometimes parsnips, swedes, carrots come out with that really rich sweetness to them. But there's a variety of other methods of preparation which just lift the vegetables on the plate and make them a real part of the dish rather than just a side. And then thinking about that, rather than just sticking on, think about the presentation. I'm not suggesting you need to go quite to the length of the pictures on the right hand side, but how we pop them on the plate, whether we garnish the vegetables with anything. For instance, if I eat broccoli, I will usually always put a squirt of lemon juice over the top, A, because it tastes better, and B, because actually the vitamin C helps with iron absorption from the broccoli itself, and I'll come on to that shortly as to why that's good. Okay, so last sort of 5 minutes or so, and this is a critical bit, because a bad vegetarian or vegan diet is a bad diet. Let's face it. Just because you eat a vegetarian diet does not mean you're healthy. If that diet is cheese sandwiches, crisps, and chocolate biscuits, it's a bad diet, even if you're not eating meat. And so it's worth thinking about some of the key questions. And I get asked these all the time, and I like to just call them out when I give talks. And these are questions that most vegetarian or vegans think have been answered years ago, but actually most of the mainstream population still ask the same questions, and quite rightly, because they're not really thinking about vegetarian and veganism as strongly as people who already are. So, where will I get my protein? If you're vegetarian, dead straightforward. Eggs predominantly, lots of cheese, although clearly cheese comes with saturated fat and salt, so in moderation. But there's a huge amount of vegan or plant-based sources of protein. I'm not going to read off the slide. You can see them there. Tofu, corn, and a range of pulses, soya milks as well. And then this idea that somehow, the 9 essential amino acids that our bodies can't process, well, only meat has those. That's wrong, actually. Tofu, tempeh, edamame beans, all from the soya family, are all complete proteins. And actually corn products are complete proteins as well. And if you want to, even if you're eating something which isn't a complete protein, often within the dish, you'll combine things, which mean you're getting all 9 essential amino acids in one meal anyway. So very rare that anyone in a vegetarian or vegan diet is short of protein, unless they're eating a very, very poor diet. Iron is the next one. Vegetarians, eggs, great source. Vegan, it's all of that lot above. Again, the dark green vegetables, the cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, watercress, spinach, cabbage, but pulses, nuts, tofu, etc. The key thing here is that there are 2 forms of iron, heme iron and non-heme iron. Heme iron comes from meat, very readily absorbed, so you can eat and absorb it very quickly. Non-heme iron is what you find in plants. There's still quite a lot of it, but it's not as readily absorbed by the body. So actually you need to make sure you're eating a bit more in terms of iron-containing foods to accommodate the fact that it's not as well absorbed. Or you can eat it with vitamin C, which helps boost absorption, hence my lemon juice on the broccoli, or a glass of orange juice alongside the meal. Well, the reality is, as the slide says there, actually meat eaters get 75% of their iron from vegetarian and vegan foods. The other 25% comes from meat and fish. So meat eaters are already getting vast majority of their iron from foods. And it takes a poor vegetarian or vegan diet, I think, to be iron deficient. You can easily. My finance director is how old is he now? He's 58. I think, forgive me for saying. He's been vegan for many, many years. He had a blood test recently. His iron levels were absolutely perfect. Again, if you think a little bit around what you're eating and eat a broad range of foods, fruits, vegetables, pulses, nuts, you should not be iron deficient. And calcium, a lot of fortified plant-based milks. Now, this is key. If you're drinking soya milks, you need to check that they are fortified with calcium, because some aren't. But again, a range of foods that have calcium. Clearly, if you're vegetarian, you don't need to worry at all, because you're having dairy products and high in calcium, as I'm sure most people know. Vitamin D boosts calcium absorption. So I'd say get out in the sunshine, but for somebody who lives in northwest Scotland, or certainly for north of the border up in Scotland, there's maybe not as much sunshine as perhaps other parts of the world. And so actually some of the guidance coming out now is that most of us probably should be supplementing with a bit of vitamin D, which you get from sunshine, but it also helps with calcium absorption as well. And then coming to the end, there's lots of other things that you'll occasionally hear people worry about. And I'm not going to go through them in detail. These are some of the micronutrients. I will share the slides so that you can see them. But again, the broad message is, if you're eating a good broad diet, you'll hear sometimes, you heard in the press, maybe we should be eating 20 or 30 different fruits and vegetables every week. It's not that hard when you think about the range of things that you eat, because that can include cereals, it can include apples, oranges, broccoli, peppers. But actually what that does is gives you a whole range of these micronutrients, so you shouldn't actually be deficient. The only areas where it's recommended that you supplement is if you're vegan, and that's with B12. So vitamin B12, it's recommended that vegans do take a B12 supplement. And also potentially, as I say, vitamin D. Now, just one of the tips for me, and this is just a personal thing. So from the point of view of omega-3s, if you eat a lot of oily fish, you're probably okay. But obviously you can't be doing that on a vegetarian and vegan diet. You can get them from, as it says there, walnuts, flax seeds. I simply take an algal oil tablet. So in the same way that people might take a fish oil tablet, I take an algal oil tablet. And the rationale for that is that the accumulation of these healthy fats in fish comes from the fact that they consume algae, and it's the algae that actually contain the EPA and the DHA, which are the two fatty acids that are good. And so actually you just go straight to the source and have the algal oil tablet rather than the fish oil tablet, if you're concerned about omega-3s. And that is pretty much that. I'm bang on 40 minutes. Excellent. So it's a broad whistle-stop tour. The one thing I would say, or there are two things I would say in closing. No, the three things I would say in closing. One is, don't be afraid to have a go, because you can't go wrong if you're swapping out one meal or one day. You cannot possibly go wrong. You might find something you don't like. Don't be put off. If you find a plant-based mince you don't like, try another plant-based mince, just as you would with any other foods. Secondly, people think vegetarian vegan diets are expensive. Now, if you buy a lot of the meat substitutes and the meat alternatives, yeah, absolutely. They're often more expensive than traditional meats, and so you will spend more money. But if you buy those sparingly and eat a good quality whole foods vegetarian vegan diet, it's cheaper. And there's been work by Oxford University that shows that vegetarian diets and vegan diets can be up to a third cheaper than a traditional diet. And the last point I'd say is you can start to over-obsess sometimes about nutrition. And the reality is, and what I do, I eat a broad, what I probably concede to be healthy diet. and I take a vitamin tablet alongside it. And actually, I suspect most people in the population who are eating a fairly unhealthy diet should be doing it anyway. And for me, it's just a bit of a catch-all. My diet's probably okay anyway, but it just gives me that sense that if I'm a bit short on one area, vitamin tablet will pick it up. But there are plenty of people who follow vegetarian and vegan diets who don't do that. So that is the end of this short talk on vegetarianism. The slide, I have to do the sales pitch. It's incumbent on me, otherwise my individual giving manager will never forgive me. So if you are interested in any aspects of the diet or the lifestyle, then you can join us as a member. You can just sign up to our newsletter. That's absolutely free. You'll get a weekly newsletter with information on our campaigns. There'll be a recipe in there every time and some other information. Or you can join us as a member. It's anywhere between £3 and £5 a month. There's a magazine that we produce, and you get access to a whole set of sort of benefits and discounts at the same time. Sales pitch over. Happy to take any questions at all. Thank you very much for listening.
That was great. Thank you so much, Richard.